Well, the journey to generate $1 billion worth of soil carbon credits to benefit United States farmers began last week. Super excited to be joined by Irfan Watkins from Dovoo today. And these guys have been absolutely crushing it with real world adoption on Hedera and beyond. But Irfan, talk a little bit about the announcement last week, and we'll get into 2026 here as well. And thanks for joining us today.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been a great start for us. And like all these sort of journeys, they don't happen overnight. So we've spent sort of many months and years really sort of building for this, which is to sort of validate really what Dovoo's all about, which is to create this sort of trust layer, that can sort of prove that something's happened, and that in this case, a carbon credit has been generated, and in this case from farmers in North Dakota, in Texas, and so on. And that credit then gets sort of certified by a third party. In this case, bCarbon, which is sort of spin out of Rice University in Houston and the Baker Institute. They sort of came out of there. A non-for-profit company, the registry in the space, and they approve the methodology through their sort of scientific panels. So we ledger all that then on Dovoo, that all of this has happened, time-stamped as you know when it's happened, and then put that into our carbon warehouse, really our digital carbon warehouse, and make that available to be sold. So it's tracking everything through the sort of system, and really, that's what that's why we joined Hedera. That's why we built it on sort of on the Guardian, and then we've added our own layer on top of that. And we've got a great sort of system. And now we're getting clients coming to us saying, "Hey, we'd like to use that. We'd like to use that system." But it's $1 billion. It's $1 billion deal over 10 years. It's a huge number, and that's not our number. That's the project's number. And now that number has been backed up by the science, which is basically saying, hey, for every acre of soil, if you use this methodology, you're going to generate X amount of credits, and then you extrapolate that by the amount of farmers that they have under contract and the farmers in their pipeline and so on. You can get to this number.
So I'm curious, I think that what we see sometimes, well, I think hopefully what we see, and you mentioned it before, we don't get into stuff before recording, but I was like, Irfan, how's 2026? He's like, well, be careful what you wish for, because you guys, like, everybody in Web3 or everybody in crypto and distributed ledger, building out real world business use cases, everybody wants adoption. And I think that's what you're alluding to. Is you're like, okay, now we have the adoption, we're super busy. So the question I kind of have is like, okay, you have this project methodology. It's been validated.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, $1 billion worth of carbon credits over the next 10 years is a big deal. But it almost seems like to me, and is it correct in assuming that once a project methodology has been validated, it's easier to then roll that into kind of the next, whatever the next thing is, because you already have kind of a benchmark that has been kind of proved out. Is that like a correct assumption?
Yeah, so absolutely. So just to clarify, we're not soil scientists. So we're not the scientist here. We're the sort of audit trail. We're the technology platform. So the methodology, sort of process that VCH has been working with bCarbon for 4 years to get to this point. And what that entails is basically data gathering. So soil sampling, getting a baseline to say, okay, how much carbon is in this soil today? Let's measure it again at the end of the year. Let's measure it again at the end of next year. Let's just, and keep measuring and measuring to see whether or not this process and this methodology works. So you have to prove it with data and stats. And they do soil sampling. They drill down like 15 inches into the ground, checking to see whether the soil is sequestering more carbon today than it was, sort of a year ago. So all of this data and analysis has been going on behind the scenes for sort of 4 years. That then goes to bCarbon, then engage an independent panel of scientists who then go through this data, and then they go, do you know what? Yep, it all stacks up. The numbers all stack up. It makes total sense. I can see the science behind it. They then approve it, and then that allows bCarbon to register that credit. So, but going back to what you were saying, once that methodology has been proved or proven, then the another project who wants to use that same process doesn't have to go through the 4 years. They just say, hey, we're following this methodology, and they can start issuing credits. So that's why it was such a momentous occasion, really, when this gets signed off, because it just opens the door to help more farmers and enable, not just in the US, but globally, really, projects to take advantage of this, the great work that VCH have sort of done.
Yeah, I think I've said this before, and this is like, obviously when you're sitting there on crypto Twitter every single day for the past 5 years, it's like, I think that there's things that still haven't, necessarily like maybe aren't like the sexiest things to like people on crypto Twitter, but are things that are 1000. Like I fundamentally, like, over time believe that kind of crypto, blockchain, distributed ledger kind of operates under the hood of pretty much everything, because I look at it, eventually it's kind of an upgrade to the internet. But you look at like carbon markets and ESG, and it's not like the sexiest thing on crypto Twitter. However, if you're paying attention, like, number one, there's a lot of, we've talked about this before, and we don't have to go down the weeds here. There's a lot of like inefficiencies and fragmentation and like lack of being able to actually accurately report, ESG initiatives within companies. There's like greenwashing and all sorts of stuff. But if you look at every single entity and every single government, they all have benchmarks for the green economy stuff. 2025 was a year, 2030 is a year, all the way out to 2050 and beyond are big years. So I guess the kind of question that I have for you is like, when you look at the opportunity, it's the low-hanging fruit question. When you look at the opportunity that's at hand here, I mean, how big of a deal is it that you guys are kind of doing what you're doing as kind of pioneers in this space, leveraging blockchain and distributed ledger in an industry that is not going to be a want or a nice to have for entities, but mandated? I mean, literally, like, this stuff's going to be mandated.
Absolutely. You got to take away sometimes some of the bluster that is talked about politically around the world, really, when it comes to sort of green economy and the green agenda. It doesn't actually get backed up much by the reality that's on the ground. US, for example, I'm not going to get political, but I think something like 12% of the US energy is wind right now. And that wouldn't be a highlight that would be coming out of the administration, but I think that is the reality. So I think and around Europe and around Asia, the sort of green economy is building, and it's not going away. So the opportunity is huge, and up to now, the businesses that operate in this space have been siloed. So you have siloed entities who then, and I'll give you an example. So a project would create, like VCH, they would create a project with a farmer. They then go to the methodology, they then go to the registry, they then go to a verifier that would continuously verify them. They would then go to the demand side, which in a lot of cases would be over-the-counter deals. Somebody sending an email, a broker calling someone up saying, hey, I've got some carbon, do you want to buy it? And that's how it's done, which means that there's no transparency on price because everything is just really complicated. So the future of carbon isn't, sort of more projects, it's platforms. It's platforms. And the reason why it's platforms is two reasons. One, data transfers between platforms. So therefore, everybody can understand what's going on, not just the trust aspect of it, but price and all the other bit. The other bit is digital. So, you think I used to say, like, you think in 3 years' time this is going to happen. Things are happening so fast, right? You think that the idea that an ESG purchaser wouldn't train an agent to take a look at carbon that fits the criteria that they need to purchase, in that sort of purchase cycle, well, of course they're going to do that. Of course that's going to happen. And the reality is that for that to happen, carbon has to be digitized. So, it's a big deal because we provide the platform, we create the digital environment, and we create the ability for agents to engage and to find the right credits for the right buyer at the right time. And we do that globally. So that's a massive sort of opportunity, for us to engage with. The other bit is tokenization. We believe everything's going to be tokenized. So once we bring in, let's say, $1 billion of assets into our warehouse, what are you going to do with that from a financial perspective? How do you create a financial model leveraging DeFi to enable money to flow faster to these farmers, faster to these projects? And you get a flywheel effect. The more liquidity, the faster the money flows through, the more projects get signed up, the more carbon gets sort of stored. And I'd encourage anybody to actually take a look at Aave, Stanny's sort of blog that came out yesterday or the day before from Aave about basically tokenizing energy and add in financial markets to that. And it's a really fascinating sort of piece. And although he's a little cynical of carbon credits, you'll come to realize that they play a role in that sort of whole sort of asset class. So yeah, hugely exciting and sort of pivotal moment.
Yeah, I think we'll get into forward-looking statements in a second here, but as you mentioned, kind of agents. I mean, you're basically talking about obviously agentic AI and what's coming to, or maybe even traditional agents that have to do some of the stuff, all this overhead that you're talking about that currently exists, where it's like, okay, we have to do this, then that, then this. When you were talking about it, it almost made me think if I were a farmer or if I were anybody trying to do this, I would get to a point where I would be like, this is just way too much and way too expensive for me to even try to go down this path of, making sure that I was meeting all of this criteria. And obviously through this technology, it just streamlines the ability to rapidly kind of onboard. And then even the agentic economy where we're heading, even more so, because if you have, for example, this methodology that's now been kind of proved out, that through this, for this $1 billion over the next 10 years and this carbon methodology, that is one thing that agentic AI does well in 2026 is being able to scrub data that already exists and then being like, okay, you have to meet this criteria. So then whenever a new user comes onto the platform and they're like, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z, we're going to get to a point where they're going to be able to plug in their unique details, whatever they may be, and it's going to be able to essentially give that, I would imagine Dovoo OS is kind of where I'm going with agentic AI and stuff. We'll be able to give them a solution that fits uniquely kind of their needs. I know that was a mouthful.
I think the idea is that if you provide a platform and you can provide access to that platform, then you can facilitate all these multiple use cases. So if somebody wanted to create a simple onboarding process for family farms, rice farms in India, for example, and they wanted to do that locally, and they could plug that into our platform. They could create a front end, they could create a user flow, they could plug that into our platform. We've got the platform to enable them to do that. And in fact, we talk about this in something that we're releasing soon. We won't talk about today, but it's in our protocol flow. So the idea that anything can be plugged in on the front end, because we've built the platform and the infrastructure now to make that sort of work. So and that's the exciting bit as well, is that once you've got that layer in and you make that open and accessible to third parties, then they can build their own sort of unique experience on that. And we've done it on the back end as well, on the sort of demand side. So our role is not to be a marketplace of demand, is to build a digital warehouse of all of these credits, provide an API to enable local demand sites to be set up. So you can do that in your local language. If you're Romanian, if you're Polish, if you're, sort of whatever, you can spin up your own, local marketplace. And again, why that's important and why that's accelerating. That's all we ever hear on Twitter nowadays. It's sort of like is how OpenClaw is spinning up front ends on the million apps, all these individual apps that are being created. And just one last thing on that as well. What's changing it is that as a buyer right now, you can actually take a look. If you plug in agentic sort of agents into this, you can take a look at it and say, hey, actually give me an analysis on what's the political climate, what's the what's the risk profile. You can do a Bloomberg analysis of carbon credits that you're looking to buy based on what's out there from the news, to decide, actually, I don't want to be buying a credit in that particular country right now because there's a civil war going on, or there's there's political unrest. So all of those things can just be layered on, which de-risks the purchase process. All of that can happen, but it can only happen if it's on a platform, and it can only happen if it's digital. And that's the opportunity.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned I did a video on, I think it was Thursday or Friday, and I literally mentioned the flywheel. I think I'd named it the flywheel effect on the image. So you mentioned as tokenization kind of all these real world assets kind of start coming on to these different networks or platforms, it creates a flywheel effect. But I think also, as you guys bring on more and more, different users of your platform through the marketplace, it almost does the same thing for the data that's being ingested into like the Dovoo like kind of ecosystem too. Like as more and more people come on, or more and more projects, or more and more whatever, it almost like strengthens the amount of information on the platform itself. So like your platform knows more, and it's almost like this flywheel effect inside of your own platform too. So not even just value, obviously value is a huge deal, but there's value in the data and the knowledge that your platform has too, as more users come on.
Absolutely. And the way that will sort of manifest itself is if you're a buyer of credits, for example, there is a cost associated in doing due diligence on each purchase, if they're large purchases. However, if you have a trusted platform and trusted data, you can eliminate the individual due diligence on each particular project, because you're getting this raw data straight from the platform, and you're analyzing that data, and you're able to make a purchase. So it speeds up and reduces the cost of all of this sort of due diligence on making these purchases, which again furthers the flywheel, because that's happening. You're getting all of the data that's coming in from that, and it just builds and builds. And that's been. And this is nothing new. We've not invented anything new here. This is just how it is for platform. If you're doing a platform play, it's just that there aren't any real platform plays in carbon. Everybody's wanted to do the same thing and extract value in the same way. And for us, we were fortunate enough to be able to keep our heads down for a number of years and not worry about revenue, because we didn't have the attention of venture capital investment that says, hey, you need to speed up, you need to do this. So we were able to sort of do it, build it up, and keep our minds on the prize, basically. And of course, now we need to speed up because we've got validation.
Yeah, I think I was going to go with the fact that, So I over the past year, like I've had the opportunity to like interview, some of like the middleware, I guess, like traditional solutions providers, which would be like your PwCs and Deloitte's and, really like the big four for like professional advisory services kind of out there. And for those that aren't aware, like these entities obviously have been in traditional forever, but like they sit kind of in the middle of crypto and Web3 and traditional enterprise, where they do a lot of like the onboarding for like technical solutions and things like that. And one of the things that I've heard, and this is like the reason I bring this up, is I think that this is the future we're heading towards, from multiple different like interviews from these people. They're all basically saying some very similar things as far as, for mass adoption to happen, we need the ability to rapidly deploy solutions. And I think that as you mentioned this flywheel effect, and we kind of talk about this agentic economy that we're heading towards, and you through Dovoo have kind of the operating system here. I think this is exactly what they're talking about. Being able to like self-fortify a model so that every time a new user comes on, it's that much quicker than it was the previous time because the model itself is getting stronger. I think it's super exciting because I look at like use cases like what you guys have built out through the marketplace and the warehouse and the operating system and everything else as being exactly what I'm hearing from some of the enterprise type interviews, which is we need the ability to rapidly deploy with enterprise. It's the same thing that you guys are doing. So, I mean, in that vein, I would love if you could talk a little bit about what's coming. What are you excited about for 2026? This is a super slow ball question. What are you excited about for 2026?
Look, I think I think it's, we're executing now against the opportunity that's presented to us. So we now know that there's other projects going to be signing up on this methodology as well. We'll be integrating Dovoo more, sort of seriously, it's not the right word, but into bCarbon for lots of other projects that they're doing. And I think the other bit, so from that perspective, it's just from our carbon credit, ecological credit aspect, it's really just making that, it's executing against that opportunity. However, what's happened in parallel to that is that, another word for methodology is workflow, really. So one of the things that we've created as a result of the carbon opportunity is this Dovoo operating system. And that Dovoo operating system proves that something has happened. But what we had to build was something that actually proved why it happened. So because that's a different proposition. The blockchain, hash graph will decide when, but why has to be also considered, especially as we outsource more of our decisions to agents. So you can end up, even in a regulatory environment where something's happened and you can't sit in front of a judge and let them know why it happened. This happened. Yeah, why? Oh, I don't know, because it was in the human memory. It was written down somewhere or wherever it is, but actually it's happening faster than that right now. So the why is really important, and that's where the Dovoo sort of OS and the flow comes in. It's really important for the carbon markets, and we'll show that out first. We'll prove how that works in the carbon markets as to why the decision was made. For example, why did that scientist sign off on the science for that particular piece of carbon? That's really important for the trust aspect of it. But if you can but it's phenomenal actually and again, you can look at Dovoo.ai as our site as an example of what we're doing there. And and literally now you can just throw in a workflow into AI, and then you can just sort of quickly wrap that into the Dovoo OS system. And you can come up with a totally, audit trail verifiable evidence sort of system. And, I think Matt put one up there. He put one up there actually that tied into the new governing council member that sort of joined over the last sort of couple of days. A fantastic use case that was really sort of spun up pretty quickly. So, that's the FedEx, one of the FedEx use cases in terms of last mile delivery for parcels, which is again a phenomenal way of looking at what we've done. So for us, there's long answer to your question there about 2026. There's a lot to be doing. I think that what's exciting for us is that we're moving from a part of our business which is more stable, which is delivering on this $1 billion opportunity, which is more, I won't say old fashioned, but things that you just need to do in order for the money to flow through and everybody to be happy. And then in parallel to that, this exciting sort of new innovation and elements around the flow, which complement but also expand the opportunity for Dovoo. And I think that actually we're entering a world where you're a CEO of a company right now, especially a small company like us, where you've got to remove some of these old habits, like, what's our roadmap look like? Roadmaps, I mean, are for the birds. It's like the idea that you look at any technical company's roadmap and you go, mate, if you're still working to that timeline, then you're not
Sure.
getting it. So it's
Well,
really,
I think it's a hugely valid point, because I mean that was I remember the benchmark for audit for doing your own research in 2020 was, does the project have a website and a roadmap? But you're totally right, because I think one of the big problems that we've seen, and I'm sorry to interrupt, is like you see all these projects or platforms or business, startups that have roadmaps, and the problem with that is like, if you're not getting users now to figure out how to tweak the platform or what needs done on the platform, arbitrarily building out for some milestone 6 months or a year from now that people might not even use is like a huge waste of time. But sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, no, you're right. And it's, obviously there's been that age-old adage of sort of like, fail quick and all of that sort of stuff. But this takes it to a whole different sort of level. And it's don't get me wrong, you need to keep your eye on your North Star as a business, but your North Star starts to become more about culture, your mission, and your team, and how you get there is something you're going to have to be nimble about and work through to get there. But your North Star stays there. That's your mission and your vision of what you're trying to build. That's your culture, your ethos, your values, your team. Everything else is absolutely critical. But this way you navigate there is definitely changing. And I think and that's our experiment with Flow, really, is to say, hey, we've built this platform, we've put that technical infrastructure in place and that investment. But hey, let's give it out. Let's give out those flows to anybody, and I did say I was going to talk about Flow, but here I am. But we were excited about it. But the idea of Flow is that you can create your own one, you can put in there, and you can earn royalties off it. Ultimately, so it enables any expert in any field to sort of publish what it is that they're an expert on, and if somebody wants to reuse it, then they'll pay for that. So it creates a new economy on that, and then underpinning that is this operating system that is also underpinning the $1 billion deal to help American farmers. And again, I don't want to move away too much from that, because I mean, this $1 billion deal the idea is from VCH to give $600 million to family farms in America, and family farms need the money because they've been hit by all sorts of economic sort of sanctions, as well as really low price in things like wheat and soy and so on. So they need all the help that they can get. And what we're hoping is that American corporates and corporations, some big technical ones who are using a lot of energy to power whatever they're powering, actually will help American farmers as well. So if you're gonna, it's a really strong story for the American people to help their local farmers.
Yeah, there's so many ways I could kind of take it as we ramp down. I mean, coming from, so I guess I'll take it from what I just kind of looked at with Dovoo.ai and like the workflows. I think it's really smart because, number one, who better to like draft out a workflow than like whatever the entity or business or individual is that actually needs to draft out the workflow. I mean, they're perfectly suited to do that. But then Dovoo kind of sits, in the background and make sure that things are in alignment with methodologies and kind of everything else that happens. And I'm sure it can give, some advisory stuff if it's there. But like, you have all these different industries where these different kind of workflows for, meeting compliance or for bringing, assets on chain or whatever it may be. That is super awesome. So first and foremost, really cool to kind of see that. And then my head goes in a direction where, like, coming from traditional project management at, like, different SMEs, a lot of these industries are still working on Excel sheets. like we have to, like, understand that, like, a lot of, so in traditional business, there are these things called, a lot of them, most companies have what's called like an ERP system, which is like an enterprise resource planning system where HR has a seat, and supply chain has a seat, and project management has a seat. Everybody has a seat. And you're using this for, the company processes. But a lot of, like, the individuals that are running projects or running whatever they're running within their organization, they're still using, like, Excel spreadsheets. So all of this stuff is at some point going to get digitized. Otherwise, these organizations are going to totally just go by the wayside. It's just a matter of time. So I think what you guys are giving the tools for, really, for all of these different entities and businesses to, light off where it kind of makes sense to kind of come on. And then, we could go in a direction of the American story, but I think that you guys are basically, like what I talked about earlier, giving the ability for entities, for individuals to, like, rapidly deploy solutions that make sense, which I think is, like, a hugely valuable thing.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's what it's about. And again, thinking about where it's come from, so it isn't some sort of random change of direction. There are literally, hundreds of new carbon methodologies being created globally right now. So, for example, you could create a soil methodology in the US, but it would need to be adapted for Thailand. It would need to be adapted for Southeast India. So everything needs to be adapted. Therefore, you need a very flexible sort of structure to take your core workflow or methodology and change it. And when you're thinking globally, as we are, that's where it came from. Really, is that how do we speed this sort of process up? And this is all about disintermediation. This is all about getting those individuals out of the picture that extract value from ultimately the farmer or the project owner, and get money to them quickly. So rather than a consultant do that change for the local area, then we can use technology to do that.
So I want to mention, to make sure that people can go and check out all the sites here, because there is a good amount. All right. I'll give the soft plug for Genfinity, genfinity.io. We do have a lot on Dovoo, so if I even I'm interested here. Yeah, we have a ton on Dovoo, so you can go and look at kind of all of the stuff that we have on Dovoo on Genfinity. Hedera has multiple case studies, but the big picture ones here. Sidebar, if you want to look at Veterans Carbon Holdings, go to veteranscarbonholdings.com. If you want to, do I have the bCarbon? Yeah, bCarbon.org. And as Irfan mentioned, excited to see what else comes out here, because you mentioned that there's going to be more work done here. On X at Dovoo Official, Dovoo.earth. You can go to the marketplace at app.dovoo.market, and Dovoo.ai, which is awesome, which I'm going to dig through here on my own. And as you mentioned, hugely valuable. I mean, even just one use case bringing 600 million, the ability to bring up to $600 million back to American farmers is absolutely massive. And I mean, I look at kind of the methodology kind of being validated, and you guys having a seat at that table, as you mentioned, as the flywheel effect. It's kind of like a snowball rolling downhill. You guys have been definitely one of the OGs that have been around for a while. That's been very interesting to watch, because I think it'll continue to be interesting to watch. I'm looking forward to 2026. So thank you for joining us today, Irfan. And
thanks for having me. Appreciate it.